Robberies at knife point have risen 47% since the pandemic. That's contributed to over 2,500 stabbing deaths since 2013. That's about 230 a year, by the way, if you haven't worked that out, with gang violence, a competitive drug market and domestic abuse blamed for the increase. Overall knife crime is up 11% in the past year, with white people made up the majority of people killed by knives, 63%. Let's speak with Norman Brennan, former police officer and director of the Law Foundation and founder. Is that Law and Order Foundation? Should that say? Just to get it it right, Norman.
That's correct.
I couldn't find the word order in my own head there for a second. We'll talk to Sheldon Thomas in a second, who can also shine some light on this as a former gang member. I mean, these statistics, they're always grim, Norman. We've been speaking for decades on this. It never seems to get much better.
Well, it doesn't, Ian, and I've read the dreadful double-page spread today in the Times, and it really is bleak reading. And I've just heard that there's going to be some sort of investigation into the gang rapes of young children. Well, it's far, far past time that we had a massive independent investigation in relation to knife crime. I mean, knife crime takes hundreds of lives a year. Today, an 18-year-old has been convicted at the Old Bailey for stabbing to death a 15-year-old schoolgirl. Last week, a 14-year-old schoolboy was stabbed to death by apparently a 15 and a 16-year-old schoolboy. When did it ever become acceptable, and I'm not saying it is, that parents were planning funerals instead of bright futures for their children? Yeah. And we don't have the police to deal with it. The criminal justice system's in a mess, and sadly we have the streets that are uncontrollable by the police and are out of control as a result of knife crime, stabbings and murders.
It's interesting, isn't it? And the typical suspects, particularly with the particular victim, when it's certainly when it comes to sort of gang-related criminality, is likely to be a young boy. That's almost always the case. I get the sense, and I guess this is another conversation, that if we were talking about this many young girls dying, then we might have some kind of investigation. I can almost hear MPs whose names we're all familiar with standing up in the House of Commons calling for it. Young girls are dying, 2,500 in just a decade. But for whatever reason, I've never been able to work it out. I hear very little from the Mayor of London. I hear him talk about ULEZ cameras. I hear him talk about all that kind of stuff. I don't hear him really get that animated about something which disproportionately is happening on his own turf.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, stop and search is a very important tool for the police. In the past decade, it's reduced from 1.5 million to about 500,000. And Met police officers tell me they're not interested in stop and searching anymore. TSG will obviously do the job that they need to do. But we don't have any laws that really are effectively enforced. So you've got the police that are chasing their tail, never knowing what they need to do. And even when police do go out and try and stop and search, I've been looking after some officers that have done a genuine stop and search, had a complaint, and their lives and careers are put at risk for years and years on end whilst they're investigated. And how many times have I suggested, even when a serving police officer, for 15 years I spoke out, 35 years in total, and I said that what we really need to do is we need 5 years mandatory prison sentences, 3 years for juveniles. We need mass stop and search. Unfortunately, we don't have the officers, and even when they do stop and search, it's some of the communities that the knife crime is prevalent on that complain the most, yet never come up with an alternative. We need a massive education programme, personal and parental responsibility. We need mentors. We need youth centres. We need to give these young children who are going to give the next generation the baton the best possible start. But if you've got a society where children are broken, they've got no hope, they've got no future, and they've got no value of life, including their own, is it a wonder why they have no qualms in taking another's life? And normally it's another child.
Yeah. Norman, It's always very thorough stuff. Thank you for your time. Really appreciated. Norman Brennan, former police officer. He is director of the Law and Order Foundation and founder of Knives Destroying Lives. Let's speak with Sheldon Thomas, former gang member, founder and chief executive of Gangs Line, which provides help and support to young men and women involved in gang culture. Sheldon, nice to have you with us. I mean, you heard some of what Norman said. I'm sure there's bits you would agree with and perhaps some bits you fundamentally disagree with. But the one thing we can all, I think, acknowledge is that whatever initiatives we've tried over the last decade don't seem to have worked.
One of the reasons why the things that we've tried over the last decade haven't worked is because it's been government-led, local authority-led, and normally the people that are leading it are usually managers and heads of service who have no understanding of the mindset of many of the young people involved in this. And then what happens is you have organizations like us who are made up of former gang members who are just wheeled in at the lastminute.com, and then they expect us to perform a miracle with no money. There's no money involved. They expect you to do it for free. They expect you to mop up a mess that's been entrenched in most communities up and down this country and in London for at least 30 years. Remember, when I was on road, some of my friends carried guns. So I'm talking back then to now, very little has changed because the people leading it are often the people who know nothing about it, but they're often the ones that the government values their opinion. So that's the reason why we're in this. I've been into meetings in the House of Parliament on many committees with MPs who literally pour scorn on when I'm saying to them. I remember distinctly, I was in a meeting 17, 18 years ago, and I said, the way to prevent gang violence, exploitation and grooming is to put in a prevention safeguarding workshops in every primary school in the UK. I got shouted down by MPs, and I will say this, by white MPs who didn't want to know anything about prevention. And because one of it was they're too young. I was explaining to them 18 years ago that all you have to do is put in prevention programs with workers or mentors like myself into these schools where we can educate young kids from the age of 9 before they transition into secondary school, because the problem comes when they go into secondary school and those guys in the secondary school and girls are already in these kind of mindset of carrying weapons, selling drugs, county lines. And so I'm saying to them, you can't wait for a child to come from primary school into a secondary school, and then you're going to go in there and say, oh, don't carry a knife, it's against the law. Please don't. Piecemeal approach does not work. The reason why Gangs Line is different to every organization is that our message is hard, we take no prisoners, and we do not mind hurting the feelings of young people as long as it deters them from doing what I used to do and what many of my friends and what many other people did, because we didn't have anyone speaking to us in our days. And so I do agree that we need more mentors. But the problem with that is the government does not want to pay. The government, and this is why the government uses police officers and school teachers to try and educate children. Now, can you imagine a 14-year-old, he's a member of a county line gang, and some school teacher or some police officer is telling him, oh, don't do this, don't do that. What chance do they have of him listening to that police officer or school teacher who's never lived his life, who doesn't grow up in a state where there's no fathers, who doesn't grow up with a mum who may have issues, doesn't grow up with a mum who has 2 or 3 kids for 2 different fathers, who is on an estate where 60% of the people on that estate are unemployed. And we've got teachers trying to tell kids and they have had none of that background, none of that understanding, but yet people like myself with lived experience, and there's other organizations like ours, we get talked down to, we get told there's no money, and we get told, oh, can't you do it for free? And this is another thing that police and the local authorities do. They use local organisations and they use them and without even compensating them. Because they live in the community, they say, oh, well, you live in the community, you can go out to them. But there's no compensation. Who do you know works for free? And these are the things that small organisations are really angry about. And we've got big organisations out there who cannot do the work, but the government gives them a multi-million-pound contract to deal with gangs and going into the prisons, but they won't give me a contract to do the same sort of work. And I can actually have people, young men and older men, listening to me.
And you speak with experience. Isn't that always the way, though, Sheldon? Is that the very people who are at the coalface of a problem, who are right, who've been there, they've got the lived experience in so many areas of life. The powers that be rarely ask those to get involved. Listen, Sheldon, we will speak again, I'm sure, on this issue. It's sad that we have to, but I know we will. Sheldon Thomas,